You know, folks, the whole world is talking about Bitcoin. Want to know why? Maybe it's because Bitcoin rose in value over 150% last year, and this is just the beginning. Bitcoin is online investing that anyone can do. Visit bitcoinuniversity.org today. Take a master class. Download the Book of Bitcoin and take your investment portfolio to the next level. Visit bitcoinuniversity.org and discover all that a Bitcoin can do for you. That's bitcoinuniversity.org, bitcoinuniversity.org.
I am a big fan of my next guest. You all know, if you're a regular listener to the More Money Show, I have Mark Maronos on all the time because he is the world's expert on what I call climate change craziness. Mark, in his he runs a website that is absolutely fantastic, and everybody should check it out. I check it out every couple of days because there's so much great information, and I always get a laugh out of it too because of the craziness of these kind of climate change wackos. And Mark Maronos' website is Climate Change Depot? Mark, great to have you on.
Thank you so much, Steve. It's climatedepot.com, and I'm also at Climate Depot on X Twitter.
ClimateDepot.com. It is so fantastic. As you know, Mark, I put out something called the Hotline every morning, and that goes to 100,000 people. And by the way, if people want to get that, just go to unleashprosperity.com and sign up for free. But I oftentimes use your stuff, Mark, because it's so fantastic. And we had something in our hotline just the other day about this. Tell my listeners about the headline right after Donald Trump was elected about something about Trump wins. And what was that one again?
Yeah, that was Grist magazine, environmental magazine. It's been around for decades, very looked up to. Trump wins, planet loses. Story at 11. It reminds you of those old spoofs, you know.
The end of the. You mean to say it's the end of the planet? It's the end of the planet. And by the way, their article, I read that article, because you linked to it, and they were saying, well, Trump's going to get rid of all these wasteful government green programs. I'm like, yeah, you go, guy. I mean, we should get rid of those programs. Mark, one of the things that I've been saying, and since you're the expert on this, I would love your, because I don't want to misstate the facts, but I've been saying that, when Donald Trump, when Joe Biden came into office, the United States was getting roughly 80% of all of our energy, including our transportation energy and everything that for our factories, for our schools, for our hospitals, to drive our cars, about 80% of that was coming from fossil fuels. And I was looking at the latest statistic, and now it's like 79%. So they spent all this money. By the way, are those statistics about right?
Yes. In fact, I go back 100 years. I think it's 1915. Globally, 80% plus of our energy is from fossil fuels. Fast forward 110 years, 80% plus of our energy. Right. The U.S. 100 years ago, it's always been about that 80% number. What they're doing is they want to invest tens of trillions in the end to not even move something on the margin.
I know.
That's the bottom line.
Yeah, no, I think it's such a good point because, when Joe Biden was asked about his legacy, he said, well, we spent $1 trillion on climate change. Okay, show us what we got for our money, right, Mark? I mean, if they didn't move the needle one iota in terms of, reducing the amount of fossil fuels, which is their major agenda. And by the way, I don't see any impact on the temperature of the planet either.
No, there's no. Here's the thing. I have a chart at climatedepot.com that shows you beginning when we got in this whole mess, Steve, and you know what year that was? 1992. George H.W. Bush went down to Rio de Janeiro and signed on to the UN Earth Summit. Anyway, that
wait. Hold on. Time out. Who did?
George H.W. Bush when he was running against Bill Clinton.
Wait, hold on, Mark. This is a really important point. You mean a Republican president, George H.W. Bush? Was that at about the time that Al Gore wrote his book about what was his famous book that he wrote, climate change?
Yeah,
Earth and the Balance.
And absolutely, it was the same. I believe it was if I'm not mistaken, exact same year. But Bill Clinton, George Bush went to this summit with the idea because he wanted to appear green. He didn't want to be against the environment. He went down there and signed on to that treaty. Later ratified on a voice vote, anonymous voice vote, by the way, of the Senate. So we don't even know who voted for or against it, but it passed, and that led to what is that? That's 32 years of nonsense. We're now at the 29th UN Climate Summit, which I just got back from in Azerbaijan. Azerbaijan.
I wanted to ask you about that in a minute because you have some great stories about what happens at those climate change conference. And by the way, thank you for doing that, Mark, because you are the one. You are the skunk at their garden party, and you report on what's actually happening at those things. But I want to. How much money would you say, Mark? Your best estimate, obviously these are not exact numbers, but going back to say from 1992, when the birth of all this craziness came about, how much would you say the United States government has spent on all these climate change programs?
Wow, that's a great question. There's so many different ways they can spend it. First of all, Inflation Reduction Act, maybe you can help me on this. They passed that. Couple $100 billion. Latest estimates are it's approaching $2 trillion. I thought Congress passed the bill. Somehow it's grown. And by the way, there's counties in California regions that are getting so much of that money, they don't have enough bureaucrats to spend it. The money's just piling up. Reminds you of the scene from Breaking Bad where he had so much drug money, he started renting storage spaces, and he didn't know what to do with it. And there's, they couldn't even launder that much. That's why I watch. I've seen estimates of, tens of trillions over those kind of decades. And I think 30 trillion sticks in my head, 50, but there's really no way. It's the same thing with like electric cars because when you put bans on stuff and you make it more expensive, they're not necessarily a tax, but there's another form of spending. And no matter what they've done, solar wind never caught on in any meaningful way in terms of replacing fossils. Same with EVs at this point.
So one of the things I am going to ask you about what happened at the climate conference, but I wrote a column last week, and I'd love your reaction to this because, Mark, you are the expert on this. But my column was titled that Joe Biden was the worst thing that ever happened to the electric vehicle industry. And here is my premise, Mark, which is that when Biden came in, he tried to force, the electric vehicles down our throats. We're going to mandate, you got to buy them and the manufacturers have to make them. And by the way, I'm not against electric vehicles. I have a hybrid and we love the hybrid. We really love it. But I think it's because it became so politicized. They became like Biden cars and nobody wanted to buy them.
Yes. And the same thing happened internationally in terms of that, the idea of forcing you, taking away choices and mandates. Mm-hmm. You go 5 years ago, most people were like, oh, electric car. They were excited by it. Elon Musk, Tesla, everyone. And then what happened? Once you were told that you didn't have a choice, and here's how deep this is. This isn't, it is Joe Biden here in the United States, but here's how deep it goes. You have Nicholas Stern, head of the World Bank, at a World Bank meeting saying that we're going to cut off financing to automakers who continue to make gas-powered cars. That was about 2 or 3 years ago. You have corporate banks led by ones in Australia and other places saying we're not going to give out car loans if people continue to buy gas-powered cars. You won't be able to qualify for a car loan if it's gas-powered. If you still own a car, we have cities in Colorado, California banning the creation of new gas stations. They want to create gas station shortages. So you have unelected bureaucrats, people like Gavin Newsom do an executive order, which then goes to the unelected California Air Resources Board, which then gets 22 states, including my home state of Virginia, I think it's 18 states, follow on this mandate. Even if you have a Republican governor, it doesn't matter because you're still on this, following. And then you have Joe Biden's unelected bureaucrats at the EPA go after gas-powered cars and all those searches. Despite all of that, by the way, 7% cap on the sales. Anyone who's bought an electric car probably already owns one. And they look at all of this as we didn't do enough. We needed to do more. They don't look at it as the idea was a failure. And you have corporate government collusion, but now every automaker is turning against this whole.
Well, now that Trump is coming in and Trump's going to get rid of a lot of those programs, my prediction is I think electric vehicle, because, until Biden came in, electric vehicle sales were doing really well, and then they completely leveled off and fell when Biden came in. So I think, you may actually see more electric vehicles now that the government's not going to be making you buy them anymore.
Forced, they might look at it. Right now, there's anger toward them. Yes, they've made them the enemy.
So let's see. Okay, so tell us about where was the climate change conference? And I saw a picture you had on your website of them all, the huge trays of meat. I thought they said you couldn't eat meat.
Okay. That's a whole other story. Going back, I worked in the U.S. Senate Environment Public Works Committee. 2006, the UN comes out with their UN Agricultural Report. Cow emissions are more dangerous for the planet than all the planes, trains, and automobiles combined. So this has been going on at least 18 years on a high-profile level, going after a war on meat and seeking meat rationing. So at this summit, we had two very prominent speakers on the opening day call for global meat tax, call for meat rationing, call for meat restrictions. Now, keep in mind, this is in addition to John Kerry already saying American farmers are going to be under the net zero crosshairs. The EPA, unelected bureaucrats of Joe Biden Harris, coming out with all the restrictions on methane emissions from cows.
I've seen them talk about wanting to get rid of cows and exterminate all the cows. I thought these were animal rights advocates.
That's right. Well, they probably want them roaming, like range-free, roaming-free cows now out west. They don't want them on penned in. So anyway, they literally called for that, and this is on the heels of former UN climate chiefs saying things like we need to make smokers uncomfortable make meat eaters uncomfortable, treat them like smokers in restaurants, put them in a meat eating section, in the back corner, or put them outside in a cold tent. This has been their goal. Well, lo and behold, I went around, and exclusive reporting, and you can see it now at Climate Depot, going around to their food court, to the restaurants at the UN, and they did have a couple booths set up, a couple food courts of vegan, and they were empty. You could hear the crickets chirping. And all the other ones where they served meat, chicken, beef, hot dogs, pork, they were packed. And the UN delegates gobbling up good old-fashioned meat, all the meat. Beef, chicken.
What hypocrisy. So, Mark, I apologize. We only have about 2.5 minutes left, and I could talk to you for another half hour about all this stuff. It's great information. So what was you also sent something around in the last 2.5 minutes. Tell us, what was the mood of the people? Obviously, they hate Donald Trump, and they hate that America is now going to destroy the planet, but they must have been in a pretty somber mood.
They absolutely are. And here's proof of the somber mood. They open up this session in another, I guess they call them petro-states. This is in Azerbaijan, former Soviet Republic. Most of 90% of its exports are fossil. And they are literally, it's like a funeral wake. Everyone is just sort of in stunned silence. The biggest thing you could see, not a single major world leader other than the UK Prime Minister, Western leader there.
Wow.
And Argentina's delegation, after 2 days, one day after they speak to Donald Trump, they pulled their entire delegation. They pull out. Island nation said, no, we're not going because nothing ever gets done. Al Gore did show up, and you know what he did? He condemned the whole process and said, we need to change this. You know what his solution to these failing conferences is? We need to ban anyone who dissents. Any oil nation shouldn't be allowed to have voting rights and have delegation. So this is their solution. The same thing they did with Donald Trump. In America, they want to ban free speech, ban any power, and turn it into a more exclusive club, but they want all the power. So they are now infighting and bickering. So thanks.
One last point, Mark, and we've literally got a minute left. But I've always said, hey, you want to stop all the carbon in the atmosphere, stop forest fires. I read a story the other day that forest fires have caused more carbon in the atmosphere than all the cars. So why don't we just do wise things that are cost effective to clean up the air rather than these crazy plans they have?
Well, because they don't make money off it. B, they don't get to control you. And that's ultimately
That's
what we're
right.
talking about. In terms of forest fires, they've done studies showing the privately owned lands have much less fires than the government-run lands. Smokey the Bear is probably the biggest arsonist in history because they don't let you do anything. They want to keep the forest natural, and so it's a mess. And by the way, wildfires on climate timescale down dramatically over the last 100 years, globally and in the U.S. and in Canada. Wow. It's not a good measure of climate. It's it's about land use, and they do a terrible job.
That is Mark Maronos. He runs the Climate Depot, right? ClimateDepot.com. It is an awesome website. He knows more about the craziness of these people. By the way, we're all for clean air and clean water and a good environment. But Mark, I don't think that's what these people are talking about.
No, not at all. In fact, they're talking about rolling climate change now as a public health threat. And right before this, senior UN climate official did an article, I think it was the UK Guardian, announcing that. And they said, like COVID, we need to roll this as a public health threat and treat it like a COVID, which means they want massive control. And that's what this is all about.
Folks, that is Mark Maronos. Mark, thanks so much for joining on a Saturday afternoon.
This is the story of the one who, as a maintenance specialist for a historic high-rise, knows that vintage charm historically needs constant attention. which is why when it's time to upgrade turn-of-the-century mechanicals, they turn to Grainger. With easy access to 1 million-plus products and the scale to deliver when and where you need them. The right tools and supplies are never far away. So the one can keep that vintage building running like new. Call, click Grainger.com, or just stop by. Grainger, for the ones who get it done.